It's really lovely to be here in Dundee, and let me add my thanks and appreciation to the University of Dundee for hosting us here today. We really do appreciate the ability to be here in these wonderful facilities. As John has already said, this is the first ever National Economic Forum meeting that has been held outside of either Glasgow or Edinburgh. So it's an important innovation, and one that we certainly intend to repeat on many occasions in the future. But I do think, in light of this being the first meeting outside of Glasgow or Edinburgh, it is significant to note, as John did, that we've got one of our highest ever attendances at today's meeting, more than 180 people present here today. So thank you to all of you for attending. As we heard from John, there are people here who have come from every part of Scotland today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And we certainly take note of the fact that getting outside of Glasgow or Edinburgh boosts the attendances, which is another reason to make sure we do it far more often. I'd also like to add my thanks to John Reid for agreeing to speak this morning. As John has said, Michelin's factory has been such an important and central part of the Dundee economy for more than 40 years now. The Michelin factory was in danger of closure less than a decade ago, but since then the company has invested significantly in the factory, and there's no doubt at all, the evidence is there to see that that investment is really paying off. Dundee is now the most competitive Michelin factory in Europe, which is an absolutely fantastic achievement. And it's a success story that chimes very much with the themes of our economic strategy, because the success of Michelin is based very much on investment, on innovation, on hard work, and in particular, and I would guess most importantly of all, on supporting, developing and investing in the workforce. So all of these things are very relevant to what I want to talk about this morning and what you will discuss in the groups later today. As John indicated, 2 weeks ago, the Scottish Government published our revised economic strategy for Scotland. That strategy sets out 4 areas for action, and I think it's important to stress 4 interdependent areas for action, what we're calling the 4 I's of innovation, investment, internationalisation and inclusive growth. And these are, of course, the subjects for the discussion groups this morning. Now, I'm going to talk a bit more about the strategy in a few minutes. You'll be relieved to hear that I don't intend to go through the entire document for you this morning, but I do want to focus on innovation in particular, and crucially, the link between innovation and productivity. But since we're meeting here today on the morning of the UK budget, the final UK budget of this Parliament, let me start by making a wider point about budgetary and fiscal and economic matters. Earlier this week I made a speech at the London School of Economics which highlighted what we as the Scottish Government see as some of the flaws in the process for the UK budget. It's one of the characteristics of UK budget processes that none of us have any real idea what the Chancellor is going to say before he stands up and says it, notwithstanding the leaks that you often get in the few days ahead, but nobody has any formal sense or official sense of what the Chancellor is going to say. And of course, he stands up and makes his budget just a matter of days before the start of the financial year, in which the decisions that he will announce today will take effect. And one of the points I was making, and one of the things we consider to be a flaw of that process, is the complete lack of consultation that there is before the budget, which often, and we've seen this in many budgets down the years, can lead to bad, poor or suboptimal decisions being made. And I contrasted that very much with the Scottish Government budget process, which I'm sure, as John would be the first to concede, is not perfect, but nevertheless that process requires us to publish a draft budget 4 whole months before we lodge a budget bill before Parliament, giving time for discussion, negotiation, consultation and compromise, which was particularly important when we were a minority government. So I think these points about process, although they are points about process, are important, because often it's the quality of the process, particularly in something as important as a budget, that will then have a direct link to the quality of the decisions that come out of that process. But in addition to talking about process on Monday, I was also talking about policy and emphasising the Scottish Government's view, our very strong view, that the current UK Government's plans for further and deeper spending cuts over the next Parliament will be deeply damaging and pose real risks, not just to individuals, although they certainly, as the cuts we've seen in this Parliament have done, will penalise and make life difficult for many individuals, including some of the most vulnerable individuals in our society. But they also pose real risks to our economy, to the recovery that's underway, and to the fragility in some respects of that recovery. The London School of Economics itself published a report last week that estimated that cuts that we've seen over this Parliament reduced our GDP by at least 1% a year during the first 2 years of this Parliament. Now, that low growth is the major reason why the UK Government has missed its own deficit reduction targets by a total of £150 billion. It's also why output per head across the UK is still below pre-recession levels. So that's why the Scottish Government has set out an alternative approach that is based on limiting real-term spending growth to just 0.5% a year. That policy, which advocates very modest spending increases instead of cuts, would still, and this is an important point, it would still see the deficit and debt reduce as a proportion of our national income every year from 2016-17. But it would free up additional resources across the UK over the next Parliament that we could invest in infrastructure, skills and innovation, all of the things that we know are vital to accelerating the growth in our economy, and also enable us to protect the public services that we all rely on and which in their own way also underpin the economic prosperity and success of our economy. And without that more moderate approach to deficit reduction, there will be real risk to the economy, both in Scotland and across the UK. Of course, that makes it even more important, if that is the scenario we're in, that we as the Scottish Government do everything we can to boost business here in Scotland. And that has been a priority for this government ever since 2007. For example, it's why we have created the most competitive business rate system in the UK, and it's why we have committed to maintaining the small business bonus if this government is re-elected for every year of the next Scottish Parliament as well. And we've already enjoyed some significant successes in what have been very tough economic times. Our exports have risen by 20% in the past 3 years, and our inward investment is at a 16-year high. So these are good signs of progress that we should celebrate and reflect on. I'm checking my watch here to make sure I'm not about to break an embargo. The latest labour market statistics were published about 20 minutes ago, so I'm free to talk about them now, but they show increasing employment and falling unemployment in Scotland over the past year. They also show that Scotland continues to have a higher employment rate than the UK as a whole. We see the youth labour market continuing to improve. Youth unemployment is now at its lowest level in 5 years, and more women are now participating in the labour market than ever before. We've got the smallest gap between male and female employment than we've seen previously. So again, all signs of progress, but we need to do more. We need to do much more. And one of the key areas we need to focus on is productivity. Now, if you look at our productivity gap with the rest of the UK, if we had been standing here in 2007, we would have been talking about a significant productivity gap between Scotland and the UK as a whole. That gap has reduced significantly since 2007. So productivity in Scotland and in the UK is now broadly on a par. But, and it's a big but, we still lag significantly behind other comparable European countries. So we're still 13% below Sweden, and 20% below Germany. So the economic strategy sets a very clear goal and objective. We want to match the best in Europe, not simply measure ourselves against UK performance, although that is important, but strive to match the performance of the best performing comparable European countries. And why do we want to do that? Because it matters. It really matters. We know that if we increase Scotland's total factor productivity by just 0.1% per year, we can boost GDP by more than 1%. In turn, that could boost employment by 11,000 and tax revenue by 400 million a year after 10 years. So these are big gains that are there to be won if we meet that productivity challenge. But if we are to meet that challenge, we need to take concerted action. Research from Nesta, the National Endowment of Science, Technology and the Arts, has calculated that more than 60% of productivity growth comes from innovation. And that is why we have put innovation absolutely at the heart of the economic strategy. One of the biggest problems facing Scotland's economy in recent generations is that despite our excellence in higher education research, and I mean excellence in higher education research, we still haven't created enough industrial innovations which have generated prosperity in Scotland overall. Now, that might be starting to change. Business research and development spending has been a real weakness for the Scottish economy in recent years, but since 2007, according to the most recent figures we have, it's increased by 29% in Scotland compared to 3% across the UK. But despite that progress, R&D spending is still too low. So we're investing more than 120 million over 6 years in innovation centres in Scotland, which will bring together industry, the public sector and university researchers to tackle some of the most important technological and medical challenges that our society faces. And this university is a partner in 5 of those centres. One of them is the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, which I had the privilege to open back in October. That centre is helping construction companies to identify new business models, new construction products, new manufacturing systems and new market opportunities, helping construction companies to do exactly what we're talking about, to innovate and to grow through innovation. And it's been estimated that the centre on its own has the potential to deliver economic growth, £300 million, and contribute to 400 additional jobs within the industry, as well as 25 jobs in the university sector. And between them, these innovation centres could create up to 5,000 jobs in Scotland. So by linking our businesses to our world-class universities, we'll deliver innovations that benefit wider society and drive economic growth. We're also establishing a national innovation forum. That forum will be chaired by the Deputy First Minister. A majority of its members will come from the business sector. It will encourage investment in innovation, and as part of that, it will provide advice to the Scottish Government and to our partners on how we can set an example by using our own policies, our own budgets and our own procurement processes to further support and drive innovation. And all of this support for innovation is connected to our wider work on entrepreneurialism through the Can-Do framework. That's a coordinated approach which will help to ensure that our research excellence leads to commercial benefits and skilled jobs. Now, I've concentrated very deliberately on the innovation element of the economic strategy today, but as I said earlier on, all of the strands are deeply interconnected. The £11 billion we're investing in infrastructure in the 3 years up until next year will also help productivity. And we know that companies that export are more likely to innovate. That's why Scottish Development International's work is so important to the delivery of our objectives. In 2011-12, SDI worked with 1,300 companies. Last year, SDI worked with and helped 2,700 companies. We know that support for internationalisation will reinforce the work we're doing at home on innovation. It won't just boost our balance of trade, though it will do that, it will also improve our productivity. There's one final element to productivity which I want to mention because of its importance. Last year's Working Together review, which was chaired by Jim Mather, who's with us this morning, recognised that many of the countries that are currently outperforming Scotland for productivity involve and engage their employees at every opportunity. So the final report of the Working Together group recommended a further shift towards a model of industrial relations based on partnership with unions, employers and government, recognising their interdependence. Rosanna Cunningham, who's here today, has been given specific responsibility for this within the Scottish Cabinet, and the government is now in the process of establishing a Fair Work Convention. We expect that convention to have its first meeting next month, and it will champion the living wage and encourage government, employers, trade unions and employees to work together to boost innovation and productivity. The Scottish Business Pledge is another important element in this partnership approach. The discussion we had at December's Economic Forum was very valuable in providing ideas and suggestions about how that pledge should operate, and since then government officials have been engaging with all of the main business organisations and indeed with some individual businesses. I had the opportunity personally to discuss the pledge with David Watt of the IOD, who I also see here today, and Nora Senior and Liz Cameron of the Scottish Chambers, and I'm very pleased and grateful that the business community is supportive of the pledge in principle. I also welcome the advice offered on the challenges businesses might face and how we can make the pledge relevant to businesses and the particular challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. Through the pledge, companies will be asked to commit themselves to good business practices, whether that's innovation or internationalisation, and to good employment practices like the living wage, gender balance, or supporting workforce engagement. And the pledge is a two-way thing. It's not all in one direction. It's also about what government can do for businesses and employers, as well as what employers can do for society and also to help their own bottom line. So we are also looking at what more we can do to help you innovate, export and expand. We'll be asking companies to enrol or adopt the pledge very shortly, and each of you will get an email on the morning of the launch, so I hope you look out for that. But I want to stress today that the pledge it's a process, not an event. The dialogue with business will continue, growing and deepening the partnership we are creating between government, business, the public sector and the third sector. And in companies across the country, it will over time help us to foster improvements in productivity and competitiveness. So just to conclude my remarks this morning, I strongly believe that the economic strategy we published just a couple of weeks ago will make a significant difference to our economy and our society. We all know, and everybody in this room is an example of the fact that Scotland is a country of vast potential. There are no limits, no intrinsic limits to what Scotland can achieve as an economy or a country. We've got a strong international brand and reputation. We've got fantastic natural resources, and we have, and this is something we should all shout from the rooftops, we've got the most highly educated workforce in Europe. We've also developed a good tradition of working in partnership together, and this forum is one of many examples of that partnership. Partnership that is about meeting economic challenges together, but also seizing economic opportunities together. Strengthening that partnership and making sure it's partnership for a clear purpose is an important element in this government's determination to support businesses across the country. So that's a key reason for holding these forum meetings. I'm delighted to see you all here this morning. Thank you very much indeed.